On the 23rd of September 2016, a handful of aviation enthusiasts found themselves on board a Tupolev 154, cruising through the crisp Friday afternoon air on a short 20-minute hop over some stunning mountains. This short flight was no ordinary trip, however. These tourists were some of the first to be landing at the new Wonsan International Airport on the eastern coast of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, near the port city of Wonsan. Once they'd boarded their trusty aircraft, part of the nation's flag-carrying airline, Air Koryo, in the nation's capital, Pyongyang, they had in fact yet to pass through passport control and actually enter the country. Instead, they had arrived earlier that day from Beijing for a transit through Pyongyang before making their departure east. A 20-minute flight might, to the untrained eye, have seemed an oddly short distance for a large international airliner like the 154. However, it was one of dozens of aircraft, both civilian and military, making their way towards Wonsan. The real reason for these flights wasn't an important summit or vital conference. Instead, thousands of locals were gathering in anticipation of the DPRK's first Air Festival. This video would not be possible without the support from my backers on Patreon. If you've enjoyed anything I've made over the last few years, please consider checking the link in the description and supporting the channel. Thank you. The Wonsan International Friendship Air Festival, or Wonsan-gukje Chinson-Hangong-Tukjeon, was held at the Wonsan International Airport over the 24th and 25th of September 2016. This weekend brought together between 10 and 15,000 local spectators and a handful of foreign visitors to witness a display like nothing the country had ever seen before. The airport itself was the first attraction. Completed in September 2015, in what would later become the country's signature modernist architectural style, this new airport had been redeveloped as part of ongoing projects around the Wonsan region to promote domestic and international tourism. The airport's new dual runways, situated meters away from the vast sandy beach of the Kalmar Peninsula, would serve as the backdrop for the performance, scheduled to include aircraft from both Air Koryo, the nation's flag carrier, and the Korean People's Army Air Force, including from its fleet of supersonic fighter jets and historical aircraft. Day one began with the opening ceremony, in which members of the festival's preparatory committee made speeches before the excited crowds. As the formalities subsided, the first aircraft hove into view. The festival opened with an aerobatic display of 4 MD-500 light utility helicopters, operated by the Korean People's Army, each of them painted in a distinctive camouflage pattern with the DPRK's Air Force roundel. What followed was the noisy takeoff of Air Koryo's Ilyushin IL-18, a large turboprop built between the 1950s and the 1980s. Although rarely operated these days, The final remaining IL-18 in Air Koryo's fleet has been in service since the 1960s, when the airline was known as Choson Minhan, or Korean Airways. It continues to be useful due to its unique ability to perform takeoff and landing on rugged airstrips. The aircraft performed a simple takeoff before circling the airport a few times, showing off its continued airworthiness before coming back into land. No sooner had the Ilyushin touched down, the roar of the DPRK's air superiority fighter jet, the twin-engined MiG-29, started up, taking off in front of the crowds before climbing sharply before performing maneuvers above the gathered onlookers below. Eventually, the MiG-29 came into land, releasing a parachute to help it slow down from its immense speed, opening up the runway for the next of Air Koryo's offerings. The Tu-134 took off, flying a few circuits around the Wonsan Kalma airport, showing off its sleek 1960s Soviet design. The Air Koryo fleet of Tu-134s was introduced as the airline began to expand its available routes. Whilst the larger sister model of the 134, the Tu-154, was introduced to fly longer international routes, the Tu-134 was brought in to handle shorter domestic flights, primarily between the capital, Pyongyang, and the country's other provincial centres. As the 134 came into land in front of the applauding crowds, the Korean People's Army once again took centre stage. The next offering was the Sukhoi Su-25, which roared into the skies with its distinctive high-set wing layout. A subsonic attack aircraft designed to provide air cover for ground forces, it's since been seen most regularly alongside the MiG-29s in recent military parades, often shooting fireworks above the celebrating masses on Kim Il-sung Square in central Pyongyang. However, this weekend, it performed rolls, spins, and steep climbs before returning back to the tarmac with another dramatic parachute-releasing flourish. After lunch, the engines reignited and the onlookers returned to the runway to watch a pair of MiG-21s, piloted by two female pilots, take to the skies. The two aircraft rocketed off the runway simultaneously to begin their display of formation flying. A precursor to the aforementioned MiG-29, the MiG-21 is a supersonic jet fighter first introduced into the Soviet Air Force in 1959, latterly joining the DPRK's Air Force inventory. No sooner had the heroic pair returned to Earth, the next major airliner stepped up to the runway, the mighty Ilyushin IL-62, with its ubiquitous 4 rear-mounted engines. This Soviet icon was first introduced in the Soviet Union in 1967, later entering service in the DPRK to bolster its international fleet for foreign destinations. Today, Air Koryo operate 2 of the aircraft, with another 2 being used for official government transport, both domestically and internationally. The sleek Soviet airliner performed multiple passes above the crowds at the airport before making its grand return and teeing up the runway for the return of the Sukhoi. This time, the Sukhoi Su-25 was not alone. Instead, 3 of the aircraft took off together, flying in formation above the airport, demonstrating their pilots' abilities both as military combat pilots and as formation flyers. The final aircraft of the day was the enormous IL-76 transport aircraft, operated by Air Koryo for domestic and international cargo flights. This mighty aircraft took off in a hail of engine noise to perform multiple low passes before returning to land. First introduced in the mid-1970s as a strategic airlifter, and Air Koryo ended up incorporating 3 of this iconic aircraft into its fleet. As its wheels touched down back on the tarmac at Wonsan Kalma, the first day of the show came to a close. The second day of the show was taken up with aircraft joyrides, allowing paying customers to ride aboard Air Koryo and some smaller military aircraft. One of the aircraft involved was the aforementioned cousin of the Tupolev 134, the Tupolev 154, the very same aircraft which had carried some of the foreign visitors to the airport the day before. The Tu-154 was first introduced with Air Koryo in 1975 to connect Eastern Bloc cities such as Prague, Sofia, Moscow, East Berlin and others with Pyongyang. Initially, the airliner was forced to stop en route to refuel, often in cities such as Novosibirsk. However, it was later made more fuel efficient and made its first direct flight to Moscow in 1982. The airliner performed a series of flybys of the airport before returning to the ground. Another of the aircraft on display was the Antonov An-24B. Designed in 1957 in the Soviet Union, the aircraft first entered service for smaller domestic routes alongside the Tu-134 during the 1970s. The twin prop design allowing it to operate from rough landing strips and unprepared airports, something which more modern airliners simply cannot handle, and a useful skill in a mountainous country such as Korea. The final entry on this exhaustive rundown was the Antonov An-2. This small biplane continues to serve a purpose in the DPRK's Air Force, outside of its regular use in military parades. First built in 1947, this light aircraft provides both a chance for new pilots to train, along with a handy second use as a small, stealthy plane for use by special forces. In this case, transporting paying thrill seekers was a temporary third use. Finally, the show came to a close in spectacular style, as Mi-17 helicopters took off from the runways filled with parachutists. What followed was multiple jumps, with parachutes adorned in the colours of the DPRK's national flag. Some incorporated smoke displays, whilst another included parachutists displaying the national flag and flag of the Workers' Party of Korea. Perhaps it was these very parachutists who would go on to undertake similar performances in Pyongyang during the nation's famous military parades. September 2016 was to see the first and the last air festival in the DPRK, at least so far. A rare chance for locals and foreigners to marvel at the vast and varied fleet of the National Airline and the National Air Force. From fighter jets and attack aircraft to Soviet airliners and earlier passenger aircraft, kept airworthy by their diligent mechanics. The airshow was a one-of-a-kind experience in the DPRK. Until the airshow returns, your best chance at flying on a Korean airliner is to join a tour and experience the country for yourself. Thanks so much for watching. This has been a bit of a different style of video, but nonetheless something I was keen to put together, so I hope you enjoyed it. As always, the music for these videos is available in the description with a link to my DPRK Explained music channel, and these videos and the channel as a whole is reliant on my generous supporters on Patreon. So if you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to help out, please check it out, link in the description. Thanks for watching.